It's hard to recognize my life. Looking back on it, I'd always thought it would be a normal small-town dream wife, 2 kids, dog and a little house. And I was well on my way to securing that little slice of Americana for myself. But despite being the best contractor in the county, the life I had built came tumbling down one day when I found out what my wife's extra shifts really were. I had always been proud of my wife long before the pandemic brought everything to a screeching halt. I known the work that being in the healthcare field was like running a perpetual gauntlet, one covered in someone else's vomit. Melissa spent long hours taking care of elderly dementia patients in a nursing home as a CNA early in her career, coming home in tears at the state of the facility and the lack of help. Then when she became an RN, she was able to move on to greener pastures, first stop our local emergency room. Despite her small frame and bubbly demeanor, my wife had always been one hell of a daredevil. She loved the heart-bursting adrenaline of roller coasters. And she drove far faster than even I dared to. That made her a great fit for where you had to know how to handle your adrenaline and still act. Finally, her career landed her on the nursing career version of free parking. She became a flight nurse for the first few months. Her social media was full of posts showing her next to the helicopter and her full gear looking tiny next to the man who she said was a pilot. She informed me it got a lot of attention from all her friends. Social media was never my thing. So I took her at a word. As for me, I had never done anything much. Melissa was my greatest accomplishment in life, just like her. I'd headed off to college just after graduation. Unlike her, I'd been more interested in making things than helping people. Her career as an engineer was what I'd been pursuing. When I finally met her, within 2 months, we were engaged and planning our life together, and my studies simply gave way to her own. Her job saved lives. After all, my career path wasn't anything quite so noble. So I fell back on my high school job working construction in a business owned by a friend's father. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us alive while Melissa finished her education. Even when she was working while at college, it was a pittance. My paycheck and sweat ensured she ate, got to class and had a roof over her head. She said one day through tears as I surprised her with the money she'd been short to cover her books. One semester I told her, "You will make it through, I promise." Then I kissed her on the forehead. She didn't need to know. I skipped lunch every day for the last 2 months to scrounge the money up. By the time she made it to the big leagues of nursing, life wasn't quite so unsteady. We'd made it through the hard part. Now, she was practically raking in the money for the first time in our lives. It felt like we could relax and enjoy ourselves a little. I started taking more holidays off, hosting more barbecues for our friends, even went to an NFL game once or twice, and her girls' night out, girls' night in spa days. She was gorgeous with as much time and cash as she spent at the salon in the mall. You'd hope so. But why should I care? She was bringing home the dough and I was reaping the rewards. There was a downside though. I began to feel lonely with all of her time at work and all of the time she spent focusing on herself. She had hardly any time left for me. Of course, she deserved pampering after all of those hours being selfless, helping our patients in every place she'd work. But it didn't make them feeling any better. I loved my wife and wanted her desperately every minute of every day. And I couldn't seem to get her to sit still long enough to let me show her how much I adored her. Finally, I knew what needed to be done. Knew exactly what would really catch her eye, being young and paying for our own wedding. A honeymoon hadn't been a possibility. It had sad Melissa to no end, and no groom likes to see his looking down on her wedding day. So I made a promise to her that one day I'd take her wherever she wanted to go in the entire world, whatever she wanted, I'd make it happen. And I had always intended to keep that promise for our 5th anniversary. I kept that promise. I'm not too manly to say the week wasn't magical. Spending 7 days with the most beautiful woman in the world, seeing her body bronze in the sun and become dewy against the sheets is something anyone would be over the moon about, and she was as happy about it as I was. The glow in her eyes told the whole story. It felt like we were brought out of stas we'd entered upon saying I do, and that we were newlyweds all over again. There was no getting enough of each other. We made love for hours every night, every day. Even today. I don't think the memory of that vacation will ever leave me now. Much more bitter than before. It's still something I'd enjoyed so long. I know it would never leave me when we got home. I carried my wife still as beautiful as the day I married her over the threshold. It was the first time I felt good enough about myself as a husband to do. So how could things have gone so badly wrong? The first thing that dented this even we created was the pandemic. While other couples were stuck at home together, whether fighting or well, I was stuck at home by myself. Melissa seemed to be working constantly. When she came home, she'd have intentions from the PPA on her skin. I tried to kiss her, rub the marks to make the pain from them go away. But she'd usually pushed me aside. I understood. I really did. She was working an exhausting schedule and trying to fight a battle against an enemy that she couldn't even see. What kind of jackass husband would put sex above something like that? So I focused my love on being accepting of her and of doing my best to support her in any way I could. She'd come home to a hot meal and a strong drink no matter what time it was when she returned whatever she wanted. I had it before she could get the sentence out. Her feet hurt. No worries. Babe, I'll carry you to the tub so you can soak, and I didn't ask anything in return, showing love to healthcare workers. Wasn't just a social movement to me, it was something I was throwing myself into with the woman I loved as a recipient. But even as things seemed to be slowing down, she started staying away more and more. I don't want you to catch COVID, she told me one day after she spent a full week in a hotel room near her workplace. Your family's health history isn't great. Your grandma's got emphysema, and you're the only one that can go out and about without possibly spreading it. She promised me things will be back to normal and we would possibly go away again. I wouldn't realize until hours later that neither of us had said I love you. Not once in the entire conversation. It made me feel like a failure of a husband after all. She was my wife, my life, and I loved her dearly. But something inside me didn't sit right that night. I hardly slept. Even as I tried to drown that feeling in my gut in cheap beer. Not long after that hit, I got another one. I lost my job. The owner felt horrible as he'd known me since I was a kid. We're letting everyone go for now. He said everyone but me and the family. It's all I can afford. And I don't know how much longer that'll last. As soon as everything's back to normal, I will hire you again. And if you find some other job in between and you don't want to leave it, you'll get no hard feelings from me. If you come back, I'll make it up to you. I'll give you a promotion and a raise. But for now, I gotta let you go. I took my marching papers along with a glowing reference, and they promised not to fight unemployment, and came home early to an empty house and an absent wife. This was the time when the loneliness was the worst. I called and called trying to get a hold of her somehow, and for nothing but our budget, she had to know that I just lost the only job I'd ever had. And the income that had helped her rise to where she was today. The phone would ring and ring and ring, but I never got an answer. I must have texted her dozens of times. Nothing, but I assumed she was busy with work, and there was nothing more noble than working extra shifts at a hospital during a pandemic. Finally, 2 days after getting she answered the sympathy. I expected it was clear. I wouldn't find it with her. Why? How could you let this happen? She said, sounding angrier than I had ever heard her before. She berated me, told me that she had no intention of supporting a spouse who didn't work. It was an ugly side. I've never seen of her before. This was North Carolina, and we'd both gotten a heaping dose of old-fashioned values just from living in the place. But I'd always thought of her as my partner in life. And my partner had just left me feeling alone, uncared for and disgusted after that. The next weeks were a blur. I'm not proud to admit that I spent most of the time drunk doing anything else. Felt like moving a mountain. I just wanted to wilt to wallow in the sorrow that my happy life and marriage had become Melissa. And I didn't talk much. I only saw her once a week, sometimes less. We slept together once. She did seem nicer, more caring, even apologizing for her outburst. But that feeling in the pit of my stomach was back, and it wasn't leaving during one of our phone calls when she answered. I could have sworn I heard a man's voice. It was low. A bit gruff, and I couldn't make out what he'd been cut off from saying. The tone, though, unmistakable. Asking Melissa about it made her laugh. She said, "You just heard the TV. I'm catching up on some shows I haven't had a chance to watch in a while." Then I asked, "Why did it stop?" "Because I paused it to talk to you." She stopped for a moment. "What are you trying to say?" Suddenly? Feeling foolish? I didn't tell the truth. I brushed the question off and tried to talk to her as though nothing was wrong. Something was wrong, though. Very wrong. I'd hear her answer the phone out of breath. It would be because she just hurried back to the hotel to rest her feet. But never again did I hear that voice over the phone. At least one day, when I had run out of beer to drink and pity to consume me, I decided something had to change. I knew my wife was off work. Now COVID be damned. I was going to pick up flowers, put on something that wasn't 3 days worn, and I was going to go see my wife. She'll be so surprised. I told her I had no idea how right that would be and how wrong. At the same time, I had always known where she was staying, why she didn't like me to visit, and had told me of her own accord. I put my foot down. I was going to know where my wife was spending her nights. If only so I know where she was. If something happened, they were across town, close to the hospital she worked out of. It's why she said she had chosen them at the front desk. I stopped. A woman was working there, red-headed, a bit slim but with green eyes that struck me for a moment. Feeling a moment of disgust with myself, I smiled in a friendly way. It took some smooth talking, but I got a key card for her room. Her booking with my credit card helped with that. That was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want her to have the chance to turn me away here. I was dressed in my Sunday best and carrying a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flower, and a bottle of rosé wine. Her favorite drink. I was ready for a special night. I walked into a nightmare upon opening the door. I didn't really comprehend what it was. At first, the lights were on and I saw the bed unmade. Then I saw skin. Then I saw red. I was stunned, which is lucky, I suppose, otherwise I might be in prison now. But it was clear what was happening. My wife, my Melissa, being intimate with another man. I felt ill. I felt something beyond anger by now. She noticed me. She was shrieking, yelling about something, then sobbing. The man was putting clothes on. It was such a blur. Somehow I ended up in the foyer of the hotel, sobbing, heartbroken and barely conscious with grief over my lost marriage. It was the receptionist that had given me the key that finally helped, and Han was rubbing my back. That contact had more intimacy than anything Melissa had given me in months. My thoughts began to cool. I began to calm down. "You seem like a good man," she was saying. "You don't deserve someone like her. Don't let her do this to you. It's going to be all right." I asked her what she meant, and the truth came out. My wife hadn't been working so many extra shifts. In fact, she'd worked a little more than I had, a steady 40-hour work week all that time. She had been sleeping with other men. The receptionist hadn't kept careful track, but knew it was more than one. I didn't go home. I went to my friend's house, the one whose father had given me my job. He drank with me and let me crash on his couch until I felt like coming home. That took 2 days. There was one stop made between his house and mine. As it turned out, she was there trying to explain wanting to save our marriage after putting nothing towards it, then shattering it with her infidelity. I didn't want that. How could I never see her as my Melissa again. She couldn't be my wife anymore. Not after what I'd seen, but I decided to get the truth out of her, and I could use this to do it. Tell me, I said, my voice so grave. I could hardly recognize it. Tell me how many, and don't lie and say that was the only one. Eyes watery. She looked down, ashamed, I suppose, at her behavior. Oddly, I found that I didn't care about it. I was completely detached. 3. She told me the whole story, skipping no details at every point in her career. She found somebody to screw behind my back while I was slaving away in the summer sun. She was studying with a fellow nursing student while in school. She didn't pull extra shifts at the nursing home. A cook there had caught her eye. There was nobody after our trip. She said fervently, nobody, just you, until the man she'd been caught with, the pilot she worked with. Of course, suddenly she was wiping her face. Please, please forgive me. I'm so sorry, she repeated in stuttering litany. Look, I got you something. It's tickets for that vacation. And I interrupted her. I got you something too. A look of fear came over her face. Melissa didn't answer. The only reply I had was handing out a packet of divorce papers. The divorce wasn't terribly lengthy, for about a month or so. It seemed like Melissa was going to push to stay together. I had heard that her pilot had gotten into trouble with his own wife for sleeping with mine. She decided to stay, but he was to have nothing with Melissa, with the other lovers long in the rearview mirror that left her alone as I'd been. I wasn't alone anymore. I was living my life and getting on with it. Work hadn't hired me back, but I've been building my reputation as a contractor. The pay was small as of now, but quickly growing. My buddy didn't mind me staying in his garage apartment until I found something a bit better. Best of all, I've gotten a pretty redhead's number from the hotel. Her name is Jean. We've had dinner 3 times now. I've never had to call her back more than twice. As for Melissa, there's something we both learned about our state law. When adultery is the cause of the divorce, it can be used to determine certain aspects of the split. Things like alimony. The judge was horrified by Melissa's behavior and took into account everything I've done to help her and how my now ex had betrayed me. That account turned out to mean a rather hefty sum of alimony every month for a very, very long time. The first night after the divorce was complete, Jean and I made love. After all, I'm not a cheater and she's not looking for any extra shifts.